Leora Ansel didn't call out, she whistled low, 2 sharp notes, and Cedar vanished through the silver veil of the falls. She hated caves. She went anyway. Jude Ashdown shot her a look, half apology, half dare, then ducked after the dog and disappeared into the sheet of water like a coin dropped into a wish. Leora tightened her pack straps and followed, because Cedar had never ignored that whistle before, because Jude wouldn't leave her to go it alone, and because there are moments when you choose your courage like a handhold and you don't let go. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The water struck her scalp like a cold hand and roared in every bone. For a heartbeat there was only drowning light, pulverized and shining. Then the river's curtain let her pass. She stumbled into a pocket of shadow and sound, the wash of water hammering the rock, the hollow throb of her own blood, Cedar's claws tick-tick-ticking on stone just ahead. "Headlamp," Jude said. His voice floated, muffled. He thumbed his light on, a pale cone lanced outward and found Cedar's rough shoulders. The dog turned his bright animal face back toward them and huffed, impatient. "I know," Leora answered, breath strung tight. She clicked on her own beam. The cavern behind the falls wasn't big, no cathedral, no glowing tourist brochure, but it was old. Stone that had learned patience the hard way. The floor sloped inward. The smell of wet limestone and iron wrapped around her. Her mind knitted the habitual inventory, slick places, ankle-breaking places, the bullnose curve where a person's foot might skate, the low shelf that would scalp Jude if he forgot his height. He stepped beside her, water streaming off his jacket, grin ghosting. "You okay?" "Not even slightly," she said, which was true in the way that included the part where a small square of her chest felt like a locked box being pried open. Fear had weight. So did loyalty. She'd learned to walk carrying both. Cedar pushed his nose into a seam in the back wall. Not a seam, Leora saw when she aimed her light, the suggestion of a line, damp but clean, as if the rock had been cut yesterday instead of shaped by a million days of falling water. Jude crouched. "There. See that?" He touched, not the line, but 2 inches beside it, respectful as if the rock could feel. "Someone stacked these blocks. This isn't just a pocket. It's a door." "You don't get to call it a door," Leora said. "Doors open. Walls disappoint you." "Grim," he said, smiling. "Help me prove you wrong." They should have turned around. The river was running high from a week of storms, the creek fed the falls like a kid dumping buckets. But Cedar had chosen, he'd run his nose across half the county since he was a pup and only ever stopped when there was something true. Dogs knew how to read the world's handwriting. Leora slipped off her gloves and traced the faintest indentation of mortar, old lime grit soft under her nails. She felt shapes half swallowed by stone, shallow, long, a tool's memory. "Somebody pried something here once," she murmured. Then pushed it back. "To hide?" Jude asked. "Or to keep?" He tested the margin with a climbing nut tool, flat, strong, made to persuade metal. Cedar sat, vibrating with a patience that wasn't. Leora put her palm on his neck and felt the river's thrum reflected in him. Jude's shoulders shifted. A flake of rock gave, a whisper, then a pop. Water hurried in through the new seam, the cold kiss of a deeper current. Leora's mouth went dry. "Jude. I've got it." He leaned his weight. The slab moved. It didn't swing on hinges, it sulked, grudged, then slid in a grinding shiver just wide enough for Cedar to shove through and vanish again, tail flagging. The dog's bark came back at them doubled, then tripled, as if spoken by more than one throat. "I am going to file a complaint with the Council of Wiser Selves," Leora said, and ducked. The passage was shoulder-tight, a rock esophagus breathing water. But it opened after 3 steps into a chamber that made both lights seem insufficient. Not for size, but because the rock wasn't rock in places. It was skin. It was script. Leora forgot her heart. She forgot cold. She let the beam travel the walls and there they were, carvings, not recent, not even frontier old. cut by hand in slow tool, a vocabulary of lines and bevels that didn't care if you understood. But some part of her did. Jude whispered, "Leo." The chamber would be barely big enough for 5 people to stand uncomfortable, but someone had made this tightness intentional. They'd carved the stone into 2 shallow panels facing each other like palms lifted for prayer. Each panel bore rows, names. Not English, not as she'd ever read it, but a naming system by shape, a baseline, a river of cuts, and perched above each branch a short, exact mark like a bird on a wire. No flourishes. No pictures to help you cheat. Just the clean grammar of stone. Cedar trotted to the far end, where the panels ended in a blunt lintel. He sat, looked back, and once, almost shyly, thumped his tail. "Do you know what this is?" Jude asked. His light trembled once and steadied. "I think," Leora said slowly, "I'm looking at a registry." "Of what?" "Names." She tasted the word as if it might offend the place. "And the way water says them." He laughed once, not unkindly. "You can hear your grad advisor in that." "My grad advisor never had hands like whoever carved these," she murmured. She slid her fingers along a groove, stopped before the chisel marks as if they were a sleeping thing you didn't want awake. She wasn't a linguist, she was a mapper, a reader of landscapes, a volunteer in the little county museum with the cabinet of mislabeled arrowheads and the ledger that still smelled like the smoke of somebody's winter cabin. But reading was reading, whether you read roads or creeks or the cut of a tool. "Look at the repeated forms," she said. "The base there, always the river. Then the branches, family lines? Tributaries. And those short marks above." "Birds on wires," Jude said. "Accents," Leora mused. "Not phonetic accents, pressure. Wait. Like the way your name is different if your mother says it or a judge does. Or a town." She caught herself. "I'm guessing. You're listening." Jude's beam flared gently across the stone. "Which is the same thing, a lot of the time." Cedar shifted and gave a small, contained whine. Leora hadn't realized she'd been ignoring the layout of small signs, the way the floor slanted, the notch carved out at knee height along the right-hand wall, the drain channels in the floor carved to be invisible unless you were on your knees. Whoever made this place had made it to survive water. That meant the people had meant to return to it. Not a one-time hidey hole. A ritual. A rule. "What are you seeing?" Jude asked. She told him. "It's built to breathe during floods. The panels sit on ledges so water can slip under. The drains, there, and there. The notch for a brace, no, a door bar. And that lintel? Look at the scours." She pointed. Something moved against that stone a lot. Opened. Closed. Opened. He had never been the kind of man to interrupt her when she was in her element. That was one reason she trusted him. The other was how he kept choosing the right scale, teasing when levity had merit, quiet when quiet meant you were listening to something truer than yourself. He didn't fill space to prove he deserved it. Who would carve a registry in a cave, he said now, just above the purl of the drains? People who knew a courthouse could burn, Leora said. The words came without thinking. People who thought water kept better records than men. She moved down the panel, introducing her light to each line. And there, near the bottom of the left-hand palm, was a form that repeated with a variation that made her throat go tight. The base line, 3 branches, and, above the middle branch, 2 marks instead of 1. It was etched deeper than the others as if the carver had pressed harder or the hand had been shaking. "Do you see that?" Leora said. Jude came close enough for his shoulder to warm her jacket. "The double ticks?" "An amendment," she whispered. "You don't hammer the stone harder unless you want the future to feel it." "What's it say?" "It says somebody changed something." She swallowed. "And they wanted the river to notice." Cedar's nose went to the seam under the lintel. He sneezed, one sneeze, then a second. A dog's version of, "Here. Here." Jude braced both hands and shouldered the lintel. It didn't move. Leora took the beam away and knelt. The seam wasn't a seam, it was a keyway with a stone square set into it like an eraser pressed into a page. Her fingertips found that the square was only stone on one side. On the other, tucked where the river couldn't see, someone had inset a plaque of something else, slate, maybe, or a varnished wood hard as old bone. She slid her knife in and twisted gently. The square lifted into her palm with the weightless promise of a found thing. It bore a shallow carving on its inside face, the same river base, the same 3 branches, and above the middle branch a long bar scored through with a small stamped circle. It didn't feel like writing. It felt like the instructions that come inside a box of something with too many parts. Leo. Jude's voice wasn't calm anymore. Look up. She did. Above the lintel, someone had carved a line that read like a sentence if a river could write one. She traced each element. This. Matches. That. Turn. Name. She felt as if she were standing in a courtroom wearing wet boots. Oh, she said. Oh. What? It's a switch. She looked at the little square in her hand. You seat the token in, here. She slid the square back into its keyway and rotated it 90 degrees until the scored circle aligned with a tiny stone pock in the lintel that would have been entirely invisible if you didn't know it was there. Something inside the wall clicked, the satisfying sound of a latch that had waited a long time to be remembered. The lintel dropped half an inch. A breath of air came through the seam dry as a drawer. Leora and Jude both stepped back on instinct, because instincts are just the river's old memory living in your bones. Help me, she said, and they levered the stone together. It swung, not outward, but inward with a sigh. Cedar, saint with 4 paws, did not flood the new space. He waited. He looked at Jude. He looked at Leora. His dog eyes said, choose. Jude glanced at Leora's mouth, not her eyes. It was his tell when he was asking for permission he didn't want to need. If we go, he said softly, we go slow. You're going because your dog is telling you there's more, Leora countered. I'm going because if something happens to you in a place like this and I'm not here to put it on the map, I won't forgive either of us. He huffed that almost laugh again and shouldered his pack. Slow, he promised. They went. The new space wasn't bigger. It was narrower, longer, like a hallway with purpose. The walls were smooth in a way that didn't read like water. The floor had been cut into shallow steps less than a rise high, a design meant to be walked by the uncertain. The air smelled old but not stale. And there, at the far end, the hallway opened into an oval chamber whose ceiling Leora could not reach even if she stood on Jude's shoulders. Her light found a single wall. It was different from the registry palms. It was all lines of small, careful letters in the alphabet of her childhood, not the river carving script. The hand that cut it had been humanly imperfect, exact in its errors. There were dates. There were names, names she recognized from the county's earliest deeds, Talmery, Quince, Vale, Ashdown. Her breath stalled facing that last one. Jude's finger was already on it. That, he said, and his voice went hoarse on the single syllable, is my grandfather's name. Jasper Ashdown, Leora read. Born on the ridge. Married Atalia Vale. Children, she trailed. Jude, look. Because the name Ashdown appeared 4 times, and 3 of those bore a small chisel cut like a period drilled at the end. The 4th had no dot. It had not been punctuated at all. And besides the unpunctuated name, someone had carved a crossbar, a long, gentle line as if someone had tried to erase a mistake from a kind of stone you couldn't erase. Jude's headlamp tremored. My dad told me once that things were messy before the ranch, he said carefully. That the family had other names. He swallowed. He didn't like to talk about before. Leora looked past the names to what came next. The engravings were not an endless column, they were a story written in 4 hard paragraphs. A testimony. Her light made sense of the letters the way water helps a throat make sense of a song. We, the families who hold the ridge and the river, we set down what we cannot carry in our pockets. If men burn paper, let water remember. If men take a name, let stone keep the one it was before. If our deeds are questioned, let the cave speak and make a liar go quiet. We have a practice to keep the peace between us. A man who marries into a house may take that house's water name, so children can hold land without quarrel. The registry marks those joinings and the old names they do not erase. A child who inherits from 2 houses shall be spoken by both names here, and the bar shall run above the name he is called in town. The bar. Leora thought of the long scored line above a branch. Jude was reading fast, lips moving like a kid on the day he realizes the book is going to love him back. We put the bar above the water name, and if there is no bar the river knows it is blood name only. A man who comes seeking to overturn what was done must bring the token that matches his branch. If it fits the keyway, then the cave opens. If it does not, he is turned away. He keeps the name he came with. The name does not keep him. Leora's skin prickled as if the cold water had found its way inside her shirt. She skipped a line, jolted by an italic scrawl that was not like the careful hand above it. By my hand, J. Vale, the last winter before I took the river name Ashdown for peace between our houses. Let it be so here even if men fight it elsewhere. She rocked back on her heels and sat without meaning to. Jude, she said. Her voice was too small for her. Your great-grandfather took your family's last name from this wall. Or from their marriage, he said distantly. From both, Leora said. He married Italia Vale and took Ashdown as a water name so land would follow a line that kept the peace. But here, she laid her hand where the italic scrawl signed itself. Here he wrote it so it would matter in the only courthouse nobody could burn, the cave. Jude's jaw flexed once. She could feel him sifting memory, fine as flour. My father hated the burial. He said the words like he was grinding his teeth. I never knew why. Because a name is law and music both, Leora said, and only realized how it would sound when its truth hung between them. Cedar pressed his muzzle into Jude's knee. The man put his hand in the rough without looking and held on as if the dog were a rope. What's carved changes whose land is whose, Jude said quietly. And who you're allowed to be when you walk into a bank, Leora answered. Names unlock rooms. They also lock them. He didn't move for a long time. She took the time he needed and the time she needed, which were different lengths and the same length simultaneously. Then Jude said, keep reading. She did. The testimony turned practical again, like the minutes from an old town meeting that got tired of fighting and figured out where to put the fairgrounds. The token shows which branch you claim. Fit it and turn it and the cave will open. The registry will be behind. Set your bar if you take a water name. Cut your dot if you take blood name only. Mark the birds as your elders say they should be marked. Carve small, true, and leave no lie to your children. There was more, chisel deep lists of families who had done exactly that and the dates they'd done it. Leora found a winter she could anchor on, a flood she'd read about in a packet of newspapers saved in the museum's attic. Here it was, reported by Stone. Then there was the last of the 4 paragraphs. It had been cut shallowly, as if with a duller chisel or a tired hand. The letters wavered like a man's breath at daybreak after a long night in a sick room. If you come to unmake what your fathers made for peace, think long. Some names carry a debt that land cannot pay. Do not turn a stone if you cannot carry what falls from it. Leora felt herself go still, head to heel. Leo? Jude asked. Do not turn a stone if you cannot carry what falls from it, she repeated, an unhelpful echo. Jude. Say it. If the cave changed your great-grandfather's name, or honored it changing, and if that change is why the Ashdown Ranch sits where it does, then anything we do here, anything, she turned to him. Her light caught on his cheekbone, surprised the gold in his eyes. If we touch the registry, it could change where you belong. It could change who you are when you sign. The idea wasn't abstract for him. She watched it land and hurt. My father would have, he stopped, the words their own cliff. He would have said leave it the hell alone. And yet, she said gently, we are here. The dog pressed his nose into Jude's palm again and gave a tiny grunt that might have been agreement or just dog breath. Jude blew out air. We're not turning anything. We were supposed to be following Cedar, not the temptation to unmake my grandparents' peace. Your grandparents may be the ones asking you to read, Leora said. They carved the wall so you'd understand what you were standing on. He made the face he made when he was caught between being irritated and knowing she was probably right. We came to see what Cedar saw. We saw it. Now we leave. I agree, Leora said, and meant it. Her chest felt hot and cold at once. She had never wanted to be the reason a friend got thrown into any kind of storm, legal or otherwise. But agreement was not the same as easy. Her eyes drifted, traitor to her better intentions, to the unpunctuated Ashdown. She said, "Do you have a middle name?" "Jude." He frowned, then tipped his head. "Jude Vale Ashdown is what my mother wrote on the back of my first school picture. We never used the Vale part except when she was making a point." "You have a bar you carry on paper, then." Leora touched the double mark in the earlier panel in her mind. This cave is telling us that bars and dots matter. She looked down at the token setter in the lintel. "It opened because our square matched your branch. Or because dogs have a better sense of destiny," Jude said lightly, which was exactly the right amount of levity for a room that might drop whole lives on your heads if you cracked the wrong piece of stone. "Let's go," Leora said. They began to leave. Cedar took one reluctant step, then planted all 4 feet and refused. He leaned his weight back. He looked into the dark behind the testimony wall and put his ears all the way forward. Leora closed her eyes and listened. The river spoke, per usual. The drains stitched water noise into a constant seam. Their breathing. The soft clatter, almost nothing, of a pebble shifting 3 rooms away. Then, boot soles. Not theirs. Not the halves of their steps. Another kind. More than one set. She cut her light. Jude killed his a fraction later. The darkness came down not like a curtain but like somebody telling you to hush. The footsteps stopped at the first registry chamber. A hand ran, impatient, wet, along the carved wall. Stone carried the sound to Leora's bones. A voice said, "He went in here." Another, "If the dog's in there, they'll be still. That woman knows better than to move and make noise." Jude's breath was on Leora's cheek now, hot, controlled. She heard him form a single word silently, "Sorry." "Do not," she mouthed back. "Not your fault. We came. This is the map." Cedar's whole body held the discipline she'd asked of him since he was a pup. Not a sound. Not a whimper. But his tail thumped once, a slow beat against Jude's shin. "I am here." Light knifed across the first chamber. It slid past the doorway's edge and stuttered against the floor where it met their hallway's lip. A third voice. "You sure this is the right cave?" "I'm sure I saw the Ashdown truck by the trailhead," the first voice said. "I'm sure we're out of time." Leora's gut went cold. She recognized the first speaker now. Kenton Hale. Developer. Lobbyist with a handshake like a fast pivot. He'd come into the county 3 years ago with renderings of glass villas like teeth along the ridge and called it progress. Since then he'd been buying, leaning, pressuring, suing. It had been almost a sport to watch his slickness meet a town's long, stubborn memory, the kind that didn't look like a weapon until the day you found out stubbornness had a better edge than money. "Hale," Jude breathed under his breath. The sound was a thought, not a word. Leora felt it in his throat more than heard it. Cedar's ears went halfway back. "It's carved in here," Hale said, and Leora could picture him reaching a hand that had never swung a hammer out as if to take credit for work he would have hired. "This registry is how they keep each other honest. If we can prove the Ashdowns took what wasn't theirs. Or if we can prove the Valas were promised more," the second voice finished eagerly. "We flip the map." "Exactly," Hale said. "And the next time Jude tries to block our easement, we bury him in filings and make the judge read scripture at the river's altar." Leora's hand found Jude's sleeve, and she squeezed once. Anger could make a space too small or teach you to breathe on the back of a knife. She knew her own anger, she didn't have to interrogate it. She had to move it aside and make room for the thinking. If they sit still, she thought, Hale will do less damage than if he finds them. If he finds them, he'll force everything. He'll bring cameras. He'll make the cave a circus. She pictured tripod legs chewing the drain channels, Klieg light cooking the carvings. She pictured the token in the keyway and felt her own stomach knot. Jude's breath said the same math. His fingers found hers and answered a simple question, wait? She tilted her hand, half. Hale's next words dropped like a screw falling into a motor. Use the charge. No, Leora said out loud, before her brain could stop her. Jude. Then she bit the name off and swallowed stone air because the hallway made sound bigger and because the men outside went quiet all at once in the way that meant they had heard the one thing she hadn't meant to give them, proof that the cave wasn't empty. A beat of silence. Leora could hear her own heartbeat, a clumsy drummer. Hale said, very pleasantly, well. Isn't that interesting? Jude turned on his light and slid it down the hallway, quick, exact, past Cedar's shoulder and onto the far wall. He made the beam say, we aren't where you think we are. We are farther. We are behind the second door. We are not yours. Don't be children, Hale said. His light answered, a bigger, wider circle. You two have walked into a courthouse. You don't get to hide under the pews and pretend the judge can't see you. Jude's voice was calm in the way that meant he remembered every bad night he had ever learned how to survive. Kenton, you set a charge in here and the cave goes under. The falls will eat your edge road in a month. You'll lose your own project before you pour a foundation. I need proof, Hale said. A stone that says what I say it says. A picture of your name where it doesn't belong. It's very simple, Jude. You'll give it to me, or I'll, as the lawyer says, compel it. Leora hated the part of herself that admired the sentence, it's clean, hateful geometry. Do not turn a stone if you cannot carry what falls from it, Jude said, not to Hale, but to the wall. He had that muscle in his cheek working again. You hear that, Kenton? The people who carved this place told you how to stop yourself from being stupid, and you still picked stupid. Move, Hale said, and the command was not for them. Fabric rasped, metal kissed metal. Leora clamped her hand around Cedar's collar. Jude caught her elbow. Back, he said softly. 3 steps. They retreated as one. The hallway took their footfalls and made them ghosts. The charge wasn't big. Hale wasn't a complete idiot. It went off with a crack like the planet sneezing. Dust leaped. Stone grit slapped Leora's face. The cave inhaled and exhaled once and everything was either going to hold or it wasn't. It held, and changed. The lintel twisted a fraction on its old iron pin. The token square in its slot rotated another tick without anyone's touch. Somewhere inside the wall, something went ratchet-click like a clock that had waited 100 years to remember the hour. The registry door swung farther inward on its own. Almost politely. Enough to make room for a person who wasn't polite to go exactly where they wanted. Hale laughed once, pleased with himself in a way Leora recognized from a dozen town meetings. That's a court order, he said. Let's have a look at your ancestors' handwriting. His light came first. Then Hale stepped into the registry chamber with the expression of a man walking into a bank where the vault is already open. 2 others followed, men Leora didn't know except to recognize them by the way they held their shoulders like people who confuse bulk with weight. Hale's light found the testimony wall beyond them and skated, curious, until it settled with disturbing animal intelligence on the Ashdown line. Leora tasted pennies. There, Hale said softly. To the men behind him, almost tender, photograph everything. No photos, Jude said. That wall's not your battery to drain. Jude, Leora murmured. I know, he said. I know. Hale tipped his head, amused. You planning to stop me? I'm planning to watch you try to make the river lie, Jude said. And then I'm planning to watch it take back your road this winter for sport. Please, Hale said, patient. No sermons. He set his hand flat on the carved names. The cave did not want that. Leora felt it through the soles of her shoes as much as she heard it. A low, offended sound. A complaint carved in geologic time. Hands off the registry, she said, before she could calculate the cost of saying it. Hale looked up. His smile was the kind that makes a decent person want a shower. You again. Me still, she said. And this. She put her palm flat 3 inches from where his lay, careful not to touch what she wasn't permitted to touch. This wall is a public trust whether or not it sits on private land. You know that. You know a court will agree in 3 days. You want a picture? Then you wait. You don't set charges and fondle history like it owes you a good time. The tiny pleasure of saying it did not, unfortunately, move his hand. Move back, Jude said. He had never liked to raise his voice at anyone, even men who deserved it, even men he could raise with one hand and set down on the other side of the creek. He raised it now. Kenton. Hale's gaze flicked briefly. Leora saw calculation move across his face like an eel. She saw the exact moment he decided he could use Jude's decency as a tool. I'll move, he said. Once I've read what I came to read. If it lines up with the rumor mill, if the Ashdowns took Vale land in a way that wasn't good law, then we'll cut the proper bar. Here. Now. He smiled wider when Jude's jaw tightened. We'll change your name back for you. No one in your office ever cut anything that wasn't a corner, Leora said. Then I suppose I'll learn a new skill, Hale said brightly, and bent closer to the line. And drew in his breath. Well, he said, after a small, victorious silence. Would you look at that? Jude didn't ask. He stepped forward with Leora. The stone said what it had always said. But it said it now to a man who wanted it to wound. Ashdown, Jasper perpendicular, the bar. Vale, Italia. Ashdown, Col. Dot. Ashdown, Mere. Dot. Ashdown, Eli. Dot. Ashdown, Lou. No dot. No bar. No punctuation at all. And above the line, so faint Leora had to tilt her light to see it, as if stone had a way of whispering privately to those who were listening, someone had once started to set the long bar and then stopped halfway through the first score. Do you see, Hale murmured, how your great-grandfather changed his mind while he was cutting? How he walked his chisel toward the bar and then took it away again? No bar for Lu, whatever he was. No dot either. Oh, this is delicious. He could have finished later, Leora said. But that was the kind of sentence you threw at a tide. It didn't stop it. He didn't, Hale said, and that's the record. Your people claim all this land under a name that isn't a name at all. Not river name, not blood name. That makes it void. And void, he said, with all the relish of a man lifting a glove puppet, means we move in while the court sorts it and suddenly I'm offering you a buyout to leave the ranch before the first snow. Jude's mouth went very flat. I will take my cattle and fence posts and put them in your lobby. Or, Hale said softly, you can take this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be the better man. Fix it here. Now. Take the right name. Walk out of this cave named by the river and let me film it for our stakeholders. He patted his jacket, and Leora would have paid good money to knock the phone out of his pocket with a hammer none of them had. It's a very strong narrative, Jude. Rancher corrects ancestors' lie, county finally embraces growth. People love closure. I don't, Jude said. I love oxygen and water and the kind of roads that don't choke the valley. Be practical, Hale said. Jude looked at Leora then, really looked, not at her mouth but into her face. The question in his eyes was not, what do I do? It was, what truth will I owe myself if I do it? She didn't make his choice for him. She did what she had always done when the map wanted to lie. She made the scale bigger. Your grandfather wrote his own name here in winter, she said softly. He bar-marked the water name above his own original, and he said why, for peace. He stopped halfway through your father's bar. Maybe he changed his mind. Maybe the chisel snapped. Maybe the flood rose and he took Atalia by the hand and ran. The cave keeps law, Jude. It also keeps weather. Hale sighed like a teacher bored with a class. You can eulogize your dead over brunch. Right now, I'm counting to 3. If you haven't pulled that bar across LU, whatever he is, by the time I'm done, I will assume you prefer my method. He smiled. 1. Don't, Leora said. She wasn't sure if she meant Jude or Hale. She tasted the word and wished it were a wall. 2, Hale said brightly. Jude shifted. Not toward the chisel shelf cut into the wall, and of course there was one, of course the makers had left tools and a way to seal them away again. Not toward Hale. He moved toward the little token square. Jude. Leora's voice was barely air. Do not turn a stone. I'm not turning, he whispered. I'm closing. He put his fingers on the square and rotated it back the way it had come. The click was quiet, but it sounded like a gavel. The lintel rose the fraction it had fallen. The door began to swing back toward shut. Hale lunged. Cedar got there first. He didn't bite. He didn't even bark. He put his body between Jude and the lunge like a boulder in a stream. Hale tripped, slammed his shoulder into the registry panel, and slid his palm across 3 names he had no right to touch. The cave did not like that either. Something deep boomed, the kind of sound you never hear and therefore cannot forget. The drains gulped. The floor said a word in bolder language. Leora grabbed Jude by the jacket and pulled. The lintel came down like a slow eyelid. Hale jammed his shoulder in the narrowing gap. No, he said, not to them, not to the cave, but to the single idea that anything could happen in this valley without his consent. No. The wedge of his body bought a sliver of time that nobody wanted. He got his hand through, open, grasping. He caught at air, then at Leora's pack strap. The pull twisted her, hard. A seam ripped. Something small tumbled out of the torn pocket and rang once on stone. The sound was a bell. Every head swung toward it. The token. Not the little square, they had seeded that. The other thing she had found in her pocket a week ago, mapping an old fence line where a post had rotted and fallen, a palm-sized round she thought was just a coin from a logging camp, punched with a hole and a little loop, pocketed without thinking because she liked the feel of it. She hadn't thought about it again until now. Now it lay spinning beside the drain by Cedar's paw, and as it spun it caught their lights and threw them back with a gleam not of metal but of oiled river slate. It bore the river line. It bore 3 branches. And above the middle branch it bore a bar with a small circle stamped in exactly the place that matched the tiny pock in the lintel. Hale saw it the way a hawk sees a rabbit move in grass. He released Leora's strap and reached with a speed she would not have credited him with at any town meeting. Jude moved at the same instant, but the space they had to move in was wrong. Cedar made the only decision in the room without politics and put his paw on the token. The door came down. The last thing Leora saw of Kent and Hale was his eyes. Not shock. Not fear. Hunger. He said, "That's my," and then stone kissed stone and the registry chamber was on one side and they were on the other with a sound that felt final in the way of winter. Darkness. Dust. Her ears ringing with the echo of a boom that had happened 100 miles below their boots. Cedar? Jude's voice was steady. Leo? I've got him. She found the dog, warm and incredulous. She found Jude's sleeve. She found herself and was surprised at where she'd left her breath. I'm here. They stood like that for a count of 10, then 20, and then the hallway gave them back their sense of size. The token still lay under Cedar's paw, a little damp, unhurt. Jude picked it up with a care that had nothing to do with its weight. He turned it over once, twice. He held it up to the lintel and the little pock there, and Leora watched every color drain from his face even though the only color was headlamp white. He whispered, Leora. What? He swallowed and turned the token so she could see the underside, the face that had lain against her pocket for days without introduction. There, shallow but certain, a human hand had scratched letters. Unprofessional. Unnecessary. The private kind of annotation you make when you want the future to know it's you. A single word, cut by someone who had likely never believed a woman standing in a dark cave would read it with a dog's breath on her wrist. Lucian. It belongs to your unpunctuated, she said, the thought assembling itself too fast. To Lu. This is his branch token. Jude nodded once. And if you fit it, Leora said, because there was no stopping the sentence now, the cave will answer you like it answers a man who asks to change a name. He closed his eyes. His thumb rubbed across the little stamped circle where the bar said yes. He opened his eyes. My entire life is on the other side of that wall, he said softly. And the one thing that could make sense is in my hand. She heard the end of the sentence he did not say, and the man who wants it most is right outside waiting for the door to blink. Do not turn a stone if you cannot carry what falls from it, Leora whispered. Jude lifted the token toward the lintel. Something deep in the earth sighed. The hallway exhaled a breath that smelled like a chest opened after a long illness. A hair-thin line of dry air traced across Leora's knuckles as if a mouth she couldn't see had leaned close to say one unambiguous word. Choose. Jude set the round against the keyway. The stone took it like a lock, taking the only key that was ever going to work. He turned it. The cave answered. And from the far side of the sealed door, Kenton Hale's voice came through stone like a radio signal blown off a truck stop at midnight, jubilant, ugly, too close. Ladies and gentlemen, he breathed, unaware that stone carries the good news to exactly the people who don't want to hear it. We are about to watch Jude Ashdown change his name. The lintel dropped another fraction. The door began to move. The drains gagged and gulped and the falls thickened their roar as if the river itself were leaning in. Leora grabbed Jude's wrist. Wait, she said. He looked at her. The token waited, turned the first of two turns the cave demanded. His face was the kind of gray you get when blood decides to go somewhere else. Wait, she said again, and then the far wall groaned and a hairline crack shot like lightning across the ceiling above them and a fist-sized rock popped free and smashed the step at Leora's heel so hard she felt the shock up her teeth. The cave, like a judge tired of lawyers, had decided to make something happen either way. Jude turned the token the rest of the way. The door slid open to a place none of them had seen. And a voice that was not Kenton Hale's said, in a timbre Leora had only ever heard in one old recording in the museum's back room when she'd catalogued tapes no one had played in 20 years. Lucian Vale Ashdown. Come claim what you were not given. The floor under Leora's boot tilted like a boat crossing wake. Cedar surged forward with a sound that wasn't a bark so much as a refusal to be left behind. Leora reached for Jude and got cloth, flesh, bone. Then the world stepped sideways, water chose a new path through stone, and everything that had once been simple fell. Fell. The floor took a slow breath and dropped another inch. Dust ghosted. Water found a new seam and hissed through it like a secret being told to the wrong ear. Leora's knee cracked against a cut step, her palm slapped stone, Cedar's weight bumped her hip, steadying them both by accident and intention. Jude stayed on his feet the way men do who've learned to ride out a bucking thing without thinking. The round token sat in the keyway, turned, the first click already done. The second waited like a held note. The lintel quivered in the old iron of its hinge. And from beyond the half-born opening the voice came again, as if the wall itself were a throat taught to speak river. Lucian Vale Ashdown. It was not loud. It did not need to be. It had the certainty of a deed read aloud in a room where every man is too tired to lie. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. Leora tasted grit. She tasted something else, metal and memory. How is it speaking? She whispered. Wind and water, Jude said. He didn't take his eyes from the turning stone. Carved reeds. Like a pipe organ made of rock. My grandfather's shed had a whistle, storm came through right, and the roof sang. Somebody taught this cave to sing names. Then it's not a ghost, she said, because she needed her fear to have walls. It's a promise, Jude said. Or a debt. On the far side of the registry door, Kenton Hale found his voice again. His words came through the crack as if he had his mouth pressed against the seam to make sure they heard. Lucian, he said, savoring it. Was that your father, Jude? Or someone else your people forgot to pay? Jude set his palm over the token like a man covering the barrel of a gun so it can't turn of its own accord. His fingers were white at the knuckles. Leora could feel the argument in his body without hearing it. Open and end it, close and keep it, do neither and drown in the question. Cedar, she breathed. The dog was already doing what he did best, holding the room between them steady with his animal certainty. He slid his weight against Jude's shin as if to say, you don't have to carry this alone, but also, choose. Lucian Vale Ashdown, the wall said a third time, almost gentle. Present hand. Speak water name and blood name. Claim peace. Something about the syntax, claim peace, lodged in Leora's throat. Not claim land. Not claim title. Claim peace. Someone had chosen those words and cut them deep enough that a century later water could still find them. Hale rattled the outer panel. Stone answered with a disapproving creak. I'm bringing a bar, he warned, and Leora pictured a steel pipe jammed into old work. Either you open that inner door, or I'll make enough space to crawl through and do your carving for you. Touch the registry again, Jude said quietly, and this valley will teach you what a flood thinks of cranes. Leora felt the small electric needle of Hale's smile even though she couldn't see it. We both know you won't let that happen, he said, soothing as a realtor. You love this valley. You'll do what's required to keep it pretty. That's always been your flaw, Jude. You think love is a tool. It's a handle. People like me lift you with it. Back, Leora murmured. It wasn't a retreat, it was geometry. She tugged Jude 2 steps away from the keyway and the door's arc. If Hale managed to wedge it, they'd need space to move. The cave approved. Or maybe that was wishful thinking dressed up as coincidence. Either way, the lintel shuddered and held. You're shaking, Jude said softly. Caves, she said. And men who use the word pretty like a leash. She swallowed and found the steady place in her voice that maps required. We need to think. If we open, we can control the narrative, for about a minute. If we close, he'll go get a bigger charge. Jude tilted his head, listening to a thing behind the talk. There's a chamber through, he said. Sounds bigger. Hollower. More air. His mouth quirked and didn't become a smile. Also a way out, maybe. The air's fresher. There's a draft. Then we open, she said. He looked at the token. Leo. I know what it costs, she said, though she didn't, not yet, not fully. But if we stay, the cave becomes court by demolition. If we move, at least the law we answer to is older than Kenton Hale. She heard herself and exhaled a rough laugh. Listen to me. I sound like the museum's weird ant. It's the right ant today, Jude said. He put his hand back on the token. On me, then. Leora caught his sleeve. Not on you alone. He nodded once. The motion knocked dust from his hair. He turned the token. The second click was not loud, but her bones felt it. The lintel settled down into its socket the way a jaw sets before a hard truth. The door swung inward, reluctant, obedient. A breath of dry air rolled over them, old as held words. Light from Hale's side knifed through and then baffled as the inner door's thickness stole it. For a blink, the three of them were an island of lamplight and a throat of stone. Then the oval chamber beyond revealed itself, slowly at first, then all at once when their cones of light found the cut and made it say its lines. It was not spectacular. Spectacular is a fireworks word. This room was deliberate. The ceiling had been carved into shallow ribs, each rib notched like a reed. Along the far wall sat a stone shelf at waist height, worn in a way that only hands and water and time can wear a thing. Above the shelf was a narrow groove running the room's width, the river line, interrupted at intervals by small pockets as neat as coin slots. The floor stepped down into a lip of basin that would fill and drain, fill and drain. Drains stitched the lip, away to somewhere polite. Temple, Leora whispered, and immediately corrected herself, because that wasn't the right word and she knew it. Clerk's counter. Jude's breath hitched once. It's where they cut the bars. At the right end of the shelf, half hidden in shadow, a set of stone tools slept in a niche, 3 chisels, a maul polished to a soft shine by hands, a tray of tokens, thin as paper, dark as wet slate. Each token bore a tiny drilled circle where a string might pass. Some hung from a frayed length of river twine, a necklace waiting for a neck. Don't touch, Leora said, not because she didn't trust Jude, but because she needed a rule she could say out loud. Not a thing, he said. I swear. The voice spoke one more time, and now that they could see the ribbed ceiling, Leora understood. Air moved through the reeds, struck the notches in sequence, and the room became a throat. The words were carved on little shutters that changed the way the air sang as they swung. Simple. Impossible. Human. Lucian Vale Ashdown, the room sang, present, hand. Speak, both names. Cut, bar or dot. Mark, birds. Birds on wires, Jude said, so soft it might have been to himself. Accents. Something thumped against the outer door. Leora flinched. Hale, impatient with the way the day wasn't obeying him, had found his bar. Metal scraped stone. Hold it, one of his men grunted. It'll slip if you push like that. We've got minutes, Leora said. She didn't mean to make it strategy. She meant to name the animal pacing the edge of her vision. Less, Jude said grimly. He set his headlamp on the shelf, cone angled up to spill light across the tools and the groove. Cedar lay down crosswise to the door as if his body could stop law. Leo, if I do this, if I speak the names and cut the line, he stopped and started again. My father told me once I was named for a man he said didn't deserve the honor. He said I'd understand one day. I didn't ask which part one was supposed to understand. He was drunk. She knew the kind of love you owe a man you also fear becoming. She said nothing. Saying nothing often made more room than a speech. My given name is Jude, he said. His father's was Lucian. Lucian Vale. He lifted the round token. If this is Lucian's branch and the cave only answers to the man named on the underside. It just answered you, Leora said, and shocked herself with the certainty in her voice. Names run with blood and with water here. Maybe it allows either. Maybe it wants both. You're the both. He looked at her, then at Cedar, then at the wall. I don't want to hand Kent in a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Then don't give him a ribbon, she said, and nodded toward the little drilled circles in the tokens, toward the strings. Give him a knot. Meaning? Meaning this place keeps records as a way to keep peace, Leora said, hearing the museum in her throat and letting it speak because it had earned the right. It isn't asking you to erase anyone. It's asking you to tell the truth about who holds what and who owes what. Bars and dots are not trophies. They're agreements. He absorbed it. The way he listened always made her chest go a little warm. He went quiet in the useful way, not the stuck way. Behind them, Hale grunted with effort. Stone groaned. Dust sifted from the inner doorframe. Move, he snapped. Put your backs into it. Cedar's hackles whispered up like grass in a breeze. Okay, Jude said. He picked up one of the hanging tokens from the tray and turned it over in his palm. No scratched name on this one, just the riverline and branches and the small circle where a bar would cut clean. I don't cut my name for Hale. I cut it for the water. I cut it because my grandparents chose peace. I cut it to keep the cave from being pried into by men who like trophies. He looked at Leora. If I take the bar, water name, Ashdown, then the registry shows the join. If I take the blood name only, Vale, then I'm saying the join never happened. Hale will have a field day. You cut what's true, Leora said. And you leave your birds. He swallowed. You'll help me spell it. You're the voice, she said. I'm the ears. He set his palm on the shelf. The stone was cold and greasy with old mineral. He put the token on the groove where the bar would run and tried not to look at his hand in a room that had asked for a hand in so many carved ways. "Speak," the room breathed, gentle as a bank teller. "Blood name." Jude's voice shook once, then braced. "Vale." He spoke it like a word he'd only ever heard on the radio and just realized was the chorus he'd been humming his whole life. "Speak," said the room. "Water name." "Ashdown," he said, and it came out stripped of the varnish of pride and also of resentment, which surprised Leora more than any resonance in stone. "Speak," said the room. "You." Jude's throat clicked. He held the token where the bar would score and looked at Leora like a man putting his head under a blade he himself had made. "Jude Vale Ashdown," he said finally. "Who is named for Lucian? Who carries both? Who will not be used?" The shelf shivered as if something in it recognized a phrase. Water somewhere in the walls said yes in a language that had one syllable and the weight of weather. "Cut," said the room. Jude picked up the smallest chisel. Leora placed them all in his hand. The handle fit like it had been waiting for the shape of him. The first strike rang the way truth does. Not beautiful. Not even satisfying. Just exact. He carried the cut across the token, stopping where the drilled circle told him to stop, the circle for the pock in the lintel, the alignment mark. When he lifted the chisel, a clean bar ran above the riverline's middle branch. The room inhaled. "Mark, birds." "Accents," Leora murmured. "2." She touched the token above the middle line with the tip of the chisel, cutting 2 small ticks in the slate so shallow they were almost polished in, not cut out. "1 for Vale. 1 for Ashdown. The way your grandfather marked the joint on the registry wall." The inner door behind them shrieked. Hale howled a wordless complaint. "Push. Push, you." "Say it," the cave said to Jude without raising its voice. "Say why." He set down the maul. He put both hands on the shelf. He bent his head not in prayer but in the posture of a man admitting a thing in a room that will not carry a lie gently. "For peace," he said. "For water to keep our records. For my grandmother who wanted the 2 houses to stop breaking fences and start sharing a spring. For my father, who never learned to like what he inherited but kept it alive anyway. For the people who live downstream of a ridge being eaten by bad roads. For the cattle and the grass, if I'm allowed to say that here. For the dog." Cedar thumped his tail once and did not ruin the moment. "And," Jude said, and the word startled him, he said it so clean, "for me. So I stopped being a hinge other people slam." The room did not applaud. It did a quieter, older thing. The drains drank. The ribs in the ceiling changed their pitch and hummed a new low chord. Leora felt it in her molars. "Seat," said the cave. "Seal." Jude lifted the token he had cut and set it into a waiting slot above the shelf. It fit with the human rightness of a lid on a box you've used your whole life. He pressed. The slot drank the token. A thin string of old twine trailed from it like the tail of a comet and then vanished, pulled inward by some mechanism that had not rusted because water doesn't rust stone. The far wall moved. Not much. Enough. A panel slid out of shadow like a drawer. Leora's light found carpentry rendered in rock, a shallow recess with 4 small depressions arranged like corners. Names had once sat there, names had been removed, names had been returned. The recess waited. Below it, a groove sloped toward a drain, ready to carry away whatever the ritual spilled, water, or maybe grief. Hale's voice cut across the room like glass dragged across a countertop. "I see light," he sang, triumphant. "They've opened it. That's consent, boys. That's a signed release." "Don't you dare," Leora said, as if her warning could reach through stone and puncture him. "Do you want to stop him?" Jude asked. "Yes," she said. "But we won't. We can't shut the cave after it's listened. We can only finish the sentence we started and make sure it can't be twisted." He nodded. His face had gone steadier. The act of cutting had given him something to stand on that wasn't an argument or a threat. He tugged the token string gently and it tugged back, like the cave acknowledging receipt. "What goes in the recess?" he asked. "Proof," Leora said. "Or an answer?" She glanced around at the tools and tokens she had sworn not to touch. "Or we're supposed to put in the token we brought and let the cave introduce it to the others." Jude took the round from the keyway, not the one he had cut and installed, but the one with Lucian scratched on the underside, and set it in the recess's upper left depression. The stone accepted it the way a palm accepts a coin. It didn't click. It didn't glow. It just lay there with the weight of a story you couldn't unread. The other 3 depressions waited. "What else?" he asked. Leora's mind surveyed their pockets like a hand smoothing a map. The only things she carried were a notebook in a zip bag, a pencil shaved with a pocket knife to a stabby point, a granola bar going damp in its wrapper, and a coil of survey twine. She looked at Jude. He lifted his hands, empty. "I brought a dog and bad decisions." Cedar lifted his head, offended by the second half. Then Leora remembered the rip. When Hale had grabbed her, a seam in her pack had torn and coughed up whatever had been nesting at the bottom. She dug fingers into that pocket now and came up with 3 things so ordinary they made her throat hurt: a brass house key, a slice of river-polished glass she'd picked up at the bend below the ranch because it was green like Jude's childhood, a folded paper, from the museum, listing the 6 families who had been known by water names in the earliest years. She unfolded it with fingers that shook. "Put the key in," Jude said. "If this is about houses." "Or put the glass," Leora said. "If this is about what the river returns." She looked at the paper. "Or we give the cave its own list back." She laughed once, helpless. "This is the worst multiple-choice exam." "Why not all 3? Jude said. "It asked for 4. She hesitated, then nodded. They set the brass key in the upper right depression. They set the green glass in the lower left. Leora slid the folded paper into the lower right, tucking it so the names showed: Talmery, Quince, Vale, Ashdown, Aura, Lant. The cave considered. Leora did not know how she knew that, but she did. The way a room considers when 100 people breathe in at once. The way a courthouse considers when a judge takes too long to speak and you realize silence is a verdict too. Then the recess sighed and slid inward. The brass key tilted and vanished as if a hand had taken it. The glass skated into shadow and made a small sound like a river dropping a pebble onto a shelf. The paper went last, pulled along a narrow slit. A draft came up through the groove, and the hairs on Leora's forearm stood up like the pines at the ridge when weather walks in. The ribs in the ceiling changed song. The registers in the reed throat engaged. Words came, not carved this time, but made, record received. Bar set. Name marked. Stewardship affirmed. Hale hammered the inner door. "What did you do?" he demanded. "What did you take? If you remove anything, that's theft of a historical." "We didn't take," Leora called through, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. "We returned what wasn't ours." She didn't mean the objects. She meant a burden. "And we left a key," Jude added, "to the cave more than to Hale. So the next ones can get home." As if the cave agreed, the wall to their left, which had looked like wall before and now looked like the kind of wall that has never had any intention of staying a wall, cracked from floor to rib. Cold air poured through. Not better air. Outside air. The scent of fur and duff and a sliver of smoke from a stove a long way off. "Way out," Leora said. "Not for all of us," Jude said. "We can't leave Hale in here to fossilize his lawsuit." "Agreed," she said, "because you didn't get to trap a man behind a registry door even if he was the kind of man who would have trapped you." "Step away," Jude called. "Kenton, listen to me, if you force that hinge you'll break the drain and drown yourself in paperwork and actual water." Hale laughed. It was a sound with teeth in it. "You're going to let me in." "We're going to let you out," Leora corrected. "We're leaving through a different door. You go back the way you came, and then you go straight to the county office and say you set a charge in a protected formation so we can file the right paperwork to keep you from touching it again. That's the deal. You don't make deals, Hale said softly. You beg. Men like me make deals. Jude rested his head against the stone and closed his eyes. When he opened them, the heat in them had burned down to something that would last an entire winter. It's not a deal, he said. It's a sentence. He went to the inner door and rolled his shoulder under the lintel. He found the weight and listened for the hinge and put his strength not against the stone but into the hinge's own desire to be relieved. The door moved, angry, reluctant, obeying its own geometry more than Jude's will. An inch. 2. Enough to make Hale stumble backward with a curse and a scramble and the light of his headlamp jitter hard across the wall like a ferret. Hale's face came into the crack a moment later, pale and streaked with sweat the way dignity looks when it gets damp. His eyes went from Jude's to Leora's and then to the new open seam to their left. No, Jude said, reading him. You go out the way you came. Hale's smile cut sideways. Or, he said, I take the door you just bought and see what's in the vault. He ducked and shoved a shoulder at the inner frame. Cedar stood up and made a sound that had nothing to do with bark and everything to do with meaning. It was enough to make one of Hale's men yank him back by the jacket. Enough, Leora said, and this time she didn't ask Stone or Law's permission to be the adult in the room. You set a charge. You nearly broke a thing you don't even have the vocabulary to name. Now you get your very lucky life and you go. If you put even one toe through this door, I will take what we just gave back and throw it in the river where even your machines can't find it for 1,000 years. One of the men behind Hale muttered, Jesus, not to take his name in vain, but out of actual admiration. Hale flushed, not with shame, with the anger small men feel when a woman refuses to hold the ladder for them. He pushed again. Jude braced again. They made a human stalemate for 3 breaths and then something in Hale's shoulders gave, not conciliation, calculation. He lifted his hands. All right, he said mildly. We'll meet you at the trucks. He smiled. Try not to get lost. He backed away. His men went with him. Their lights jittered across the registry wall one last time, and Leora whispered something she had not said since she was a child, a thank you to a place that had kept faith longer than most people do. The inner door settled back into place of its own accord when Jude released it. It didn't lock. It didn't need to. The hinge sang one low note, done, and stopped. Out? Jude asked. Out, Leora agreed. Before he decides to be creative. They followed the cold breath into the seam. The passage narrowed immediately, no river had carved this, human hands had. The steps were too shallow to have been made for a hurry, but they went in a hurry anyway because you don't linger in a throat when a mouth just closed behind you. The seam elbowed left, then right, then widened. The ribbed ceiling gave way to boulder and the kind of roughness that meant the makers had accepted what the mountain gave and did not demand a perfect haul. Their lights found a weave of roots near the roof, old as sins, thin as hair. The air smelled less like old paper now and more like pine bark. Cedar went first the way water does. He stopped once to look back at them and then ducked into a final low tunnel and they crawled after him on hands and knees and came out into a thin slat of daylight like a blade. Trees. Ferns bruised by their elbows. A silence full of birds pretending not to be relieved. They were higher than the falls. Leora could see the plume of its mist bursting below and drifting in a blown curtain like cloth on a line. Across the narrow canyon, the ridge wore its early snow green. Above, a ragged slice of sky. She took a breath that was not measured, it was greedy. Jude set his hands on his knees and let his head hang for one long count. He looked up at last with a face you'd trust to build a road that didn't break a creek. You okay? No, she said, and smiled with all her teeth. Yes. I don't know. Cedar shook himself, furious at dust, delighted by wind. He nosed Leora's hand and then Jude's and then the slot they had come through as if to ask if the story needed him to fetch anything else. Trucks, Jude said. If they're still at the trailhead. If, Leora said. They cut uphill along the contour, following deer paths and Jude's sense of the land that had raised him. They stayed off the obvious line. They moved quiet for two people with their hearts at the base of their tongues. Below them the falls talked to Rock in the language that had taught the cave to sing. Leora listened for the rare sound of an engine. She heard nothing but trees being trees. "Leo," Jude said after a while, voice low as if the firs might eavesdrop, "I think Lucian is my father's father." "Your grandfather," she said, letting the thought settle between them like a pack set down. "He left," Jude said. "Or was thrown out. Depending on which kitchen you hear it in." He blew out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "This valley keeps score with pie and grudges. And yet," she said, "they cut bars for peace. And then forgot how to read them," he said. "Or pretended they did." They reached the ridge and dropped through huckleberry and willow to the old service road. Two sets of tire tracks cut the damp dirt, fresh, frantic. Hale's rig and his men's had peeled out hard enough to spit gravel at their own tailgates. Jude crouched and touched a fingerprint in the mud, and something in his shoulders let go that had been holding on for 2 hours too long. "They left," he said. "For now," she said. "He's a man who sleeps with his boots on." "Law first," Jude said. "We file what needs filing. We put the cave on the register." He looked at her. "We bring the right people down there. Not to carve. To learn. We also don't tell anyone how the door sings," Leora said, and surprised herself with the fierceness in it. "Not until the county can afford to build a proper vestibule and someone carves signs big enough even Kenton can read them." Jude's mouth did the almost smile again. "You're the weird aunt's favorite. Don't mock the patron saint of archives," she said. "She'll label your socks." They reached the trailhead. Jude's truck sat where he'd left it, dented fender, sticker peeling, dignity intact. Hale's black SUV was gone, his vanity plate a memory Leora didn't waste brain on. They loaded Cedar, climbed in, and for one long minute neither of them moved because moving meant the map got bigger, and sometimes you want the map to be a rune you can carry in your mouth without choking. "County office?" Jude said. "Doc Green first," Leora said automatically, and then shook her head at her own reflex as if she could dislodge an old story she wasn't inside of. "Wrong town. Right instinct." "Yes. Office. Then your mother." Jude winced like a man stepping into cold water. "She will not enjoy today." "She will endure it," Leora said, "and then she will feed you something with gravy." He looked at her. "You always know what to do next." "I don't," she said. "I just listen for the sound the room makes when you move toward or away from the thing that will hurt less later." They drove. The road unwound under them like a paragraph. Cedar put his chin on the center console between them and blinked slowly in the way of dogs who choose to be the bridge. The county building wore its usual tired suit. The clerk behind the glass, Maricela, who knew every baby name for the last 20 years and every old man's secret trapline, looked up, took in their faces, and slid the partition open. "What did you two do?" she asked, but the question didn't carry censure, it carried a soldier's readiness. "We found a historical site," Leora said. "Under the falls. It was damaged this morning by an explosive charge." She kept her voice level. "We need to file for immediate protective status." Maricela's eyes sharpened. "You have forms?" "I have photos," Leora said, and lifted her empty hands. "No, I don't. The cave doesn't like cameras." She took out her notebook and slid it under the glass. "I have drawings. And names." She turned to Jude. "He has a token." Jude placed the cut token, the one he'd bar scored and set, not Lucian's, on the counter and did not let go until Maricela had her hand on it too. "This stays in the county vault," he said. "You log it. You log the chain of custody. You get the DA. And a judge. And you call Sheriff Mallister." "Mallister's boy," Maricela murmured, not as a question. "He'll come. He likes you less than his dad liked your granddad. But he'll come." She picked up the token like it was a newborn. Name on it? Jude Vale Ashdown, he said. And Lucian, she asked, too casually, and Leora marveled again at how this valley carried all its gossip like ammunition and lullabies both. Lucian's the story, Jude said. Not the case. Not yet. Maricela nodded once, approving of the way he had drawn a line. Sit. Drink water. I'll fetch the forms that say immediate with the right teeth. She hesitated. Kenton Hale was here an hour ago, very angry that paper takes time. He filed something about an easement at the Old Vale line. He said you'd been obstructing. Leora felt how the day would fork if she didn't step on the right stones. We are asking for a temporary restraining order pending investigation, she said. Public interest. Potential harm. The county's duty to preserve. She smiled without pleasure. And we are asking for a hearing on the validity of any filings he made that are downstream of an explosive. Maricela grinned a wolf's grin. I like you better than coffee, she said, and vanished. Jude sagged into a chair. Cedar collapsed at his boots and turned his head to put his muzzle over Jude's shoe as if he'd been holding that last duty in reserve. Leora stood because sitting would let something settle that she wasn't ready to let settle. You okay? He asked. No, she said, and meant it. You? Same, he said. But we put our names where they go. Not all of them, she said. We will, he said, and whether he meant in stone or in rooms with fluorescent lights, she didn't ask. The rest of the hour turned into paper and signatures and explanations in rooms that smelled like toner. Sheriff Mallister's boy came, jaw set. He didn't like Jude. He liked charges set and Caves even less. The deputy DA asked precise questions. Leora answered what she could with a mapper's language, letting the Cave's own words, claim peace, do work when human law felt thin. By the time they stepped back out into a sun that had removed its morning chill, the county had filed for emergency protection, a judge had signed a temporary order, and Kenton Hale had left 3 messages for Jude, the last colder than the first, the middle one friendly, the first one trying out a performative concern that had not found a buyer in Leora's bones. Jude didn't answer any of them. He turned his phone off and set it face down as if it were a very small, very annoying man. Home, Leora said. Home, he agreed. They drove out of town. The road lifted, then fell. The sky moved across their windshield like the lid of an eye. The ranch gate came into view, the old Ashdown arch the way men carve their names in wood when they're in love with being named. Jude slowed. He did not turn in. Your mother, Leora said. He nodded and pulled to the shoulder and let the engine run for a while like a horse who needs to walk out of the bit. Cedar put his chin on the window frame and sighed. Do you want me there? She asked. I want you where you want to be, he said, which was inconvenient and true. I want to be where the map is being drawn, she said, which was also inconvenient and true. He turned up the drive. The house met them with its porch steps like a row of old teeth and the smell of laundry warmed by sun and wood stove. Mary Ashdown, Jude's mother, came to the screen door with a dish towel in her hands and the kind of face that can hold grief and pie without dropping either. She took one look at her son, one at Leora, and her jaw worked the way stone hinges work, deciding whether to hold or open. You look like you crawled through a chimney, she said. Close, Leora said. Mary's eyes flicked to the dust on Jude's jacket, to the smear of Green River on his sleeve, to the way his mouth had lost its usual jokes. She opened the door. Come in. Don't touch anything with those clothes. Sit at the table. I'll bring towels. They obeyed. Cedar lay precisely on the kitchen rug square he had been assigned since puppyhood and pretended virtue. Mary set towels on the table and thumped 2 glasses down and filled them with water that tasted like the pump in the childhoods of men who never left. She folded her arms and leaned a hip on the counter in the way of mothers who do not plan to let anyone leave without the truth. What did you do? She asked. We found the registry under the falls, Jude said. And then because he was his mother's son and had never learned to hide from her, he added, I cut a bar. Mary's eyes closed, opened. For who? For me, he said. For us. For peace, Leora added, quietly. Mary's jaw flexed. Your father would have. She stopped and pressed her lips together around a word that might have been exploded or ignored or buried. She changed it. He would have split wood. We'll do that, Jude said. Soon. Mary stared at the towels as if they were maps. Lucian, she said, not looking up. They called him Luke when he was small. He ran from everything except the bottle. He came back to marry your grandmother and changed his name because her father told him to, or he wouldn't eat at their table. He carved half a bar for his youngest because he couldn't stand to give the old man all of him, or he couldn't finish a thing he started. She lifted her eyes. Or because the flood came. Your grandfather never told me. He liked his stories with heroics. He was a liar when it hurt less than telling the truth. Jude swallowed. I said a full bar. Mary nodded once. Good, she said, but her voice made the word taste like bone. You'll pay for it. We filed, Leora said. Hale set a charge. There will be consequences. There are always consequences. Mary came to the table and sat and put her palm flat on the wood exactly the way Jude had put his hand on the cave shelf. Tell me everything. Leave out nothing. Then you split wood. Then we eat. They told her. 3 times she interrupted to ask a question that put the blade of an old story between 2 new ones so that the slices fell clean. Once she laughed and did not apologize. Twice she swore and did not apologize. At the end she sat back and rubbed her wrists and stared at the window where the ridge wore its ordinary face. You brought back a key, she said. You took nothing. We gave a list, Leora said. And a piece of river glass. Mary nodded. The river keeps what matters, she said. And what you throw away comes back to cut your feet if you ignore it. She stood. Go split the wood. I need the noise. They split wood until their arms buzzed. Cedar supervised from a stack of rounds and tried to yawn the axe into better aim. The sun slid. The ridge held. The message came at dusk. Not a text, not a call. A truck at the gate and a young deputy on the porch with the serious face of men who are not old enough for the errands they're sent on. Mr. Ashdown, he said. Ma'am. Ms. Ansell. He had Leora's name from Maricela, or from County Myth. There's been an incident at the falls. He swallowed. Mr. Hale is missing. Jude went still enough to be stone. Missing, Mary said in the voice she used when men lied about fence lines. Define. His vehicle was found at the trailhead, the deputy said. We have reason to believe he re-entered the cave after you left. The recent rain raised the flow. A jam in the outer door's hinge broke loose and we have a partial collapse. We're asking you not to go down there. He cleared his throat. We're asking you because we know you will if we don't. Leora's hands were cold and stingy with her blood. Who's in there? She asked. Just Kenton. We think there was one other, the deputy said. We don't know. We're trying to listen through the rock, but he stopped, embarrassed by the smallness of his tools. It's hard. Mary put a hand on Jude's forearm and squeezed once. You'll go, she said. It was not permission or command. It was weather. Jude looked at Leora. She looked back at him and then down at Cedar, who had already stood and was vibrating with purpose like a tuning fork that wanted only to be struck. We go slow, she said. We go as far as the cave lets us. We go with rope. We go with the county. We go with whatever we learned today and none of what we didn't. Jude nodded. I need my headlamp, he said, and the ridiculousness of the sentence, the smallness of it, made her want to sit on the porch and cry for 10 minutes. She didn't. She put her hand on his back as he reached for the gear bag and felt the steady under his unsteady. They drove in convoy back to the trailhead. The dark under the trees was a different animal than the dark under the falls. The falls were a mouth. The trees were a choir with the wrong hymn. Men's voices made the wrong kind of echoes. The sheriff's boy had a map and a grim line where his mouth should be. Leora drew her own lines on paper, angles, distances, a geometry that might become a way out. They went in. The outer chamber's air was saturated with a wet newness that had nothing to do with time. The inner door sulked on its hinge as if embarrassed to be seen with its face crooked. Mud smeared the registry wall where Hale's hand had learned nothing. The reeds in the ceiling sang nothing at all. "Here," Jude said softly, kneeling. The drain right of the doorway gurgled the way a throat does when a promise has lodged wrong. He put his palm over the water and felt, not temperature, a tremor. He closed his eyes. "Back there," he said, and nodded toward the scene they had taken to the side exit. "The one we slid through. It's breathing." They slid through. The seam had narrowed where a slouch of rock had reheated. They went sideways with their shoulders turned. Cedar went ahead, then circled back with a sound she had never heard from him, half whine, half bark, cut off as if he'd been told to be quiet by something he trusted. They came to the low tunnel that had spit them out into green air hours before. It did not spit. It sucked. The breath was the kind of breath a body takes when the lungs have forgotten their job. "Jude," Leora said. "Rope?" "They rigged the line because you never don't," and they bowed their heads and crawled into the throat. It was shorter than it had been. Or longer. It had learned a new shape while they were away. Leora went last to keep the rope honest, and halfway through, the rock pressed her ribs in a way that made little blue sparks pop at the edges of her vision. She breathed out and made her body into the shape of a yes and slid into a space that should not have been a space and was. The slot beyond gave them no sky. It gave them the smell of the river and the light of 3 headlamps, one jittering. "Kenton," Jude said. Hale stood on a shelf above the now turbid run, his face gray in a way that made Leora's panic sit down and get responsible. A young man crouched 2 feet away on a wedge of rock, water slapping his boots. He had the look of someone who had followed orders so long he had forgotten his own feet, and then the order had run out and there was nothing left to stand on. "About time," Hale said, but his voice cracked at the end the way a man's does when he has just finished counting his breaths to make sure there are more than 10. "You're the one who came back," Jude said, so gently that for a moment Leora could not find the room for her anger. "The door's off the hinge," Hale said. "I thought I could." He saw his own sentence and did not finish it. "It moved," he said instead, childlike. "It does that," Leora said. "Like weather." She looked at the young man. "What's your name?" The boy blinked at her as if the word had to be fished out of cold water. "Milo," he said. "Milo Carr." "Hi, Milo," she said. "I'm Leora. This is Jude. That's Cedar. We're going to get you off that perch." "I can't swim," Milo said, because the part of him that made statements had decided to interrupt. "That's okay," she said. "Neither can rocks. But they still move. We're smarter than rocks." She handed the end of the rope to Jude. "Anchor there. We make a 2-point. She pointed at a horn of stone above Hale's left shoulder and the jammed wedge to his right. "Cedar, stay." Cedar stayed, vibrating. They built a harness out of the line because knots are just names said with rope. Leora talked Milo into it the way you talk a scared animal into a stall without using teeth. Jude anchored. The sheriff's boy, who had slid in behind them with competent quiet, braced the other line with his body and history. "On you," Jude said to Leora, and because she had been the one to say weird aunt and clerk in bar, she went into the water first. It was shock cold. It hammered her thighs and tried to turn her into a tree. She let it push until she could read it and then leaned into the part that would carry a person across if you stopped trying to fight the whole river with your ankles. She reached Milo first because he was the breaking thing. She put his hand on the rope and his other hand on her shoulder and said the 3 lies that are also true in emergencies. "You're okay, I've got you, it will be over soon." He wept once, silently, then stopped because he was busy not dying. Jude hauled, the deputy held, and Milo slid to the ledge where Cedar licked his knuckles as if the dog had decided to be his grandmother. Then Hale. He did not put his hand where she said to put his hand. He put it higher, then lower, then where he thought the rope should be if the world were built for him. She said his name once the way the cave had said Lucian, like a fact that would not become a different fact if you argued with it, and he looked at her and then he obeyed because obedience is a muscle even men like him build sometimes by accident. They hauled him across. He stumbled onto their ledge and sat abruptly, which was a mercy because if he had tried to stand like dignity he would have fallen like pride. "Thank you," he said, almost invisible. "Don't make me regret it," Jude said. "I won't," Hale said, and the lie was so tired he didn't even try to wear it like a tie. He looked at Jude's headlamp beam, at the rope, at the dog, at Leora's hands. He looked at the slot back toward the registry room. He said, "Small," it spoke. Leora didn't ask what. She let the cave keep its side of the conversation. They went out the way they had come in hours before, only slower because men who have almost died are heavy with the not dying. The seam accepted their shoulders again. The registry chamber received them with a silence so exact it made her eyes ache. The reed throat hummed once like a throat clearing and then was still. Hale stopped with his hand a breath from the testimony wall and did not touch it. Leora did not thank him. Some mercies shouldn't be named. Outside, the night had come down with both hands. The sheriff's boy took Hale's elbow without pretending it was an invitation. Milo looked at Cedar and then at Leora as if he were trying to memorize which actions had led to being alive. She put a hand on his shoulder. "Go home," she said. "Tell your mother you quit. If you want a job that doesn't kill you, the museum needs a person who knows how to carry a thing without breaking it." He nodded like a boy and like a man. "Yes, ma'am." Mary Ashdown had left the porch light on because of course she had. They went back to it and stood under it as if electricity could absolve them. It could not. It warmed their faces, which was not nothing. "You did the right thing," Mary said to Leora when Jude carried the rope to the shed. "And a very stupid thing." "Yes," Leora said. "He would have done the stupid thing anyway. I tried to make it the right one." Mary looked at her for a long time, and in the look was a question that sounded like, "What, exactly, are you to my son?" Leora felt her skin answer before her mouth did. "I am his map and his echo and the person who will stand in the cave with him when the room asks for a name." Mary nodded once, a shared language. "Eat," she said. They did. The food tasted like a truce. Cedar snored like a horse. Halfway through the second slice of pie, Jude's phone, resurrected, buzzed like a live wire. He frowned, reached, stopped. Leora reached instead because she had become a person who opened doors for him. The screen showed an unknown number with a local exchange. She answered. A woman's voice, low, steady. "Ms. Ansel?" "Yes." "This is Atalia Vale," the voice said, and Leora's fork slipped and clanged because that name belonged to Stone and Winter in dead men's handwriting. "I'm calling from downriver. My granddaughter runs the Townry Orchard now. We've always kept a copy of the water names because my mother kept things the county forgot. My cousin says you went under the falls today. He says the cave spoke." Leora swallowed. "It did." "Then you will come tomorrow," Atalia Vale said, as if invitations were also weather. "You will bring Jude. And the dog if he knows how to behave. I will bring the ledger we kept when men started burning paper. And I will tell you why Lucian never got his bar." "Why tomorrow?" Leora asked, because asking a question sometimes turns a command into a conversation. "Because," Atalia Vale said calmly, "if we leave the story in the cave, it belongs to any man who kicks a door. If we tell it at my table, it belongs to us again." A pause, then the softest rasp of humor. "Also, because I am 91, and people should not make me wait when the creek is running." Leora looked at Jude. He watched her face the way you watch the ridge for smoke. She mouthed Atalia and he closed his eyes once and opened them and looked older and younger, as if the day had taken his name and handed it back a little truer than it had been that morning. "We'll come," Leora said. "Good," Atalia said. "Bring pie. People talk better when their mouths know sweetness." The line clicked. Leora let the phone hang in her hand for a long time before she set it down. "What?" Mary asked. "Atalia Vale," Leora said. "She has a ledger. She wants to tell us why Lucian never got his bar." Mary's mouth compressed like a wound, deciding whether to scab. "I'll bake," she said. Jude laughed once, and this time it was not a brittle sound. "Of course you will." He pushed his plate away and stood and went to the back door and opened it and looked out at the yard and the stars trying to be seen through the kitchen light. He said, to the dark, to Leora, to whatever had learned his name in stone, "I can live with who I was today." Leora stood beside him and put her shoulder to his shoulder, two names touching. Cedar came and leaned his whole dog body against both of them and sighed like an old man in a new chair. The porch light hummed. The night held. Far up the canyon, under the falls, a hinge settled 1 millimeter into a truer seat. And somewhere on the Vale place, a woman closed a ledger and put her palm on it and waited for morning. The creek that ran behind their words climbed 3 rocks and hesitated, and in that tiny pause, in that held breath, Leora felt the map shift under her feet and knew, with the steadiness she usually saved for using a chisel near sacred things, that the story was about to stop letting them be careful. When morning came, the road to Atalia's would not be empty. The morning put its hand on the ridge and found it already awake. Leora stood at the tailgate while Jude slid the pie tin into a cardboard box beside a coil of rope, 2 headlamps, spare batteries, and the small notebook that had become a second heart in her pocket. Cedar watched her with the particular look of a dog who has appointed himself logistics chief and morale officer. When morning came, the road to Atalia's would not be empty, she had told herself before sleep made a brief and confused attempt to claim her. Now the road proved her right. 2 county trucks idled at the turnoff with their flashers stunned into polite blinks. A neighbor's Ford eased into the pullout. Mrs. Quince leaned out her window, her gray braid a long punctuation mark. The orchard's old delivery flatbed rattled past loaded with wooden crates and men in hats who pretended nothing but brought everything, eyes, ears, witness. "Everyone's coming," Jude murmured. "Everyone always comes when the story shows its teeth," Leora said. She tried to sound like she had made that up for comfort and not because it was the only sentence big enough to hold this morning. She closed the tailgate and put her palm flat on the metal for one breath. "Let's go." They took the ridge road slow. The orchard fell in green waves, talmary trees in ordered ranks, the last of the apples blushing under leaves like a modest thought. Atalia's place sat where the land broke from slope to bowl, the house small and long-shouldered against the weather. An old woman stood on the porch with a ledger in her hands and a look on her face like a verdict that had already decided to be mercy. Atalia Vale had a spine like a beam and hands like the kind of wood you don't waste for kindling. Her hair was white without apology. When she saw Jude, something in her mouth tried not to be a smile and failed. "You look like your grandmother when she was about to win an argument," Atalia said. "I hope so," Jude said. "I have 2 I need to win." He glanced at Leora. "This is Leora." Atalia studied Leora like a woman reads weather on a ridge, looking for speed and direction, not color. "You're the mapper," she said. "Thank you for listening to Stone." "I tried," Leora said. She did not say, "The cave made it easier by singing." She did not say, "The map sang back a little, too." "Bring the dog," Atalia added, without looking down. "He'll keep the men honest." Inside smelled like coffee and decades of soap, like wood warmed until it remembered its forest. Atalia set the ledger on the table and patted its worn cover. "I've had this book on my shelf since I was 19. My mother kept it before me. Her aunt kept it before her. It's a twin to the stone under the falls. Not as solemn. Not as secret. But cut from the same cloth." She lifted the cover. The pages were thick and a little furred at the edges with use, handmade paper, Leora realized. Names lay down the columns in a crabbed, careful hand: Talmary, Quince, Ashdown, Vale. Between them, lines. Above some, bars as thin as a thought. After others, dots. Jude's hand drifted toward the page and stopped just above it. "My grandfather." Atalia wet her fingertip and turned a page with a reverence that had nothing to do with worship and everything to do with memory. Here. She tapped a line halfway down the left-hand side. Jasper Vale, Bar to Ashdown, witnessed by Ora Talmery and Lant Quince. In the margin, a note in a different hand, born on the ridge. Took water name for peace at the spring. Leora felt her breath fall into sync with the ledger's clean certainty. That matches the stone. Atalia nodded. As it should. Paper can be burned. Stone can be broken. You keep both, and you keep a river running. She turned 2 more pages. Here. Ashdown, Call. Ashdown, Mere. Ashdown, Eli. Ashdown, Lou. The space after Lu wasn't a blank so much as a held breath. Lucian, Atalia said, and her mouth made the name without romantic flourishes. My cousin. The worst good-hearted man I ever knew, or the best foolish one. He was supposed to be a bridge. He kept trying to be a fire. Mary's voice from last night echoed in Leora's head. They called him Luke when he was small. He ran from everything except the bottle. He came back to marry your grandmother. Leora didn't trust the memory entirely. Memory wore other people's clothes when you weren't looking. But Atalia's voice folded itself into the same shape. Why no bar? Jude asked. His thumb had found the table's groove and made a worry stone of it. Atalia traced the half-finished line with one finger. Because the cave asked for a hand when no one had one to give. The flood of 59 came in a hurry. The men were carving in winter because the spring had split them into 2 camps over a fence and a calf and a pail of foolishness. Jasper, your Jasper, finally said enough. He took his bride's name as water name. They marked the other children so no one could quarrel over inheritance and creek access. They brought Lucian, small and angry, to the cave to put the bar where it belonged, and then the water rose and took the lower footbridge and they ran as if a mouth had opened under them. The cave kept its hinge. The men lost their nerve. Jude closed his eyes. Leora watched the memory of a story he hadn't lived rearrange the furniture in his chest. When he opened them again, he had the look of a man adjusting to a room in which the walls had shifted by inches but the door was still where it had always been. What happened after? He asked. Atalia married Jasper and made pies for men who argued and never asked them to breathe while they chewed, Atalia said. There was pride in her voice and a little grief. Lucian took the water name and then set it down and then picked it up again, depending on whether he needed a loan or not. Your father, she paused. Your father preferred not to be named at all when he could help it. He signed Jude on receipts and Luke when he was angry and your mother's family name on checks so her account would bounce alone. The ledger couldn't keep up with his preferences. The cave doesn't care about preferences. It cares about peace. That's why we carve. Jude nodded once, slow. I cut the bar yesterday, he said. On a token. Atalia's eyes warmed like a stove waking. Good, she said, and then the word turned harder in her mouth. But the registry wall still carries the half-mark. Hale's kind make fortunes out of half-marks. They exploit hesitation and sell it as closure. She laid both hands on the ledger. So we're going to write where we can't be edited. I'm not cutting stone in your kitchen, Jude said, deadpan. Atalia huffed, a thready laugh. You're not. You're going to go back to the cave with me and 2 witnesses from houses that don't owe you anything and we'll ask the room to hear the truth before the county clerk has to pretend he understands it. I'm too old to crawl like a beetle, so you'll carry the ledger and I'll carry a mouth. She lifted a paper bag from the counter and set it beside the book. It clinked. And I'm bringing the only bribe the dead have ever liked. What's in that? Leora asked. Cider, Atalia said. From the old trees. Fermented the way my mother taught me before the state decided to license wisdom. We pour it at the mouth and say thank you. The cave doesn't drink. But it remembers that we did. A truck door slammed outside. Leora's shoulder tightened before her ears told her why. She and Jude moved to the window at the same time. Two SUVs had parked nose-to-nose with Italia's gate as if trying to make the entrance think twice. Men in neat clothes stood in the yard like the idea of property rights had sprouted loafers. At their center, Kenton Hale wore yesterday's near drowning like an accessory he hadn't had time to return. His suit had dried with wrinkles he was pretending not to feel. He seemed smaller in the day. Or maybe Leora had learned where his edges really were. "Miss Vale," Hale called, not stepping onto the porch, because even men like him recognized some thresholds. "Ms. Ansell." "Mr. Ashdown." "Good morning." He smiled. "Fine. I've reconsidered. Let's talk." Italia took Leora's place at the window and squinted as if at whether that wouldn't make up its mind. "I don't invite crows to my table," she said. "I'm here as a neighbor," Hale said. "With a reasonable proposal. I recognize the cultural significance of your little cave. I propose a compromise. The easement goes through the lower bench where it will barely tickle your view. I write a check with a lot of zeros, and we all stop arguing about names." Two truths, Italia said over her shoulder to Leora, and a polished lie. She opened the door and stepped onto the porch with her ledger against her hip. Leora followed. Jude stood to Italia's other side. Cedar came and sat exactly on the line between porch and yard with the air of a bouncer whose list was short. "Mr. Hale," Italia said, and Leora almost felt sorry for him the way a person almost feels sorry for weather that doesn't understand the mountain it's about to hit. "Do you know what men like you call compromise?" Hale's teeth glanced the light. "Progress. Tax write-off," Italia said. A few of the men in the yard snorted before they remembered where their paychecks were signed. "You set a charge in a protected place, Mr. Hale. You touched a wall that written words, mine and better women's, have kept safe for 100 years and more. You didn't ask permission because you don't recognize that the river outranks your filings." She tipped the ledger so the sun flashed on its worn cloth. "You don't get to propose now. I'm here to prevent a tragedy," Hale said smoothly. "If this dispute spills into the courts and the press and the valley ends up with a federal conservation designation, this town's economy will choke. I'm offering to thread a needle. My road will bring money. Contractors. Wages. Your children can come home and have jobs." "Children don't come home for wages," Jude said quietly, surprisingly. "They come home because there's still a home." Hale's smile made a sound Leora did not have a word for. "You carved your bar, didn't you?" he asked. "I heard the cave sing." He touched his sternum as if the remembered sound had struck him in the chest. "How poetic. So let's be practical. Make it legal. Sign this." He lifted a sheaf of paper. "You adopt the water name by affidavit. You register it with the county. You waive any claim to contest our bench road if it falls entirely on Vale land as it's currently described." He tilted his head. "In return, I drop my suit to compel disclosure of the registry." Italia laughed, and this time she did not apologize to anyone. "Listen to this man offering to stop stealing if you'll let him move the fence 2 inches into your kitchen." Leora put one boot on the top step. "No one is signing anything on your car hood," she said, as evenly as she could make the words. "We're going to the falls. We're going to let a room older than your dad's golf club say the part of the story we haven't heard." "Ms. Ansell," Hale said. "Be reasonable." "I am," she said. "Which is why I'm going to go write in stone and then come back and bother men in jackets with the right forms." She smiled like an apology. "You can come as far as the turn in the trail and then you can sit and think about what words you want to eat for lunch." He considered pushing past, and then he considered Cedar, who had never bitten anyone but whom the entire county had chosen to credit with a history of violence. He backed down one step, too, and made a show of making it look like a retreat he preferred. "Clock's ticking," he said. "Winter's almost here. The court calendar is full. If you drag this to January, then January will be busy," Italia said, and turned her back on him in the way that was its own language. They took the trail with the ledger in a pack wrapped in wax cloth like a precious loaf, the cider in Italia's bag clinking like bells warning the living to behave. The county trucks idled at the lower pullout. 2 deputies stood with arms crossed and chins tucked against the cold that hadn't decided to be cold yet. Witnesses fell into line out of habit more than plan. Ora Talmary's granddaughter Mina, old Mr. Lant who walked like a tree and had been quietly scary since the late 70s, Mrs. Quince with her braid and her peppermint tin of opinions. 2 from houses that don't owe you, Atalia said, satisfied. And 2 more because the Ridge likes a quorum. They reached the falls. The sound draped around them, the silver curtain breathed. The mouth that had tried to eat them yesterday looked as if it had spent the night thinking about how not to embarrass itself. The registry door sulked slightly crooked, but hale. The scene that had given them a way out yawned with a new shyness. Atalia stopped at the lip and set the bag down. She uncorked a brown bottle and poured amber into a chipped enamel mug. The cider flexed an old mussel smell that made Leora's eyes sting. Atalia tipped the first measure onto the rock above the door, just a splash. For the ones who carved, she said, her voice neither loud nor small. For the ones who ran during the flood. For the ones who finished what they started. For the ones who will. She drank a swallow and passed the mug to Jude. Jude drank and passed to Leora. Leora tilted the cup to Cedar's nose and the dog sniffed, sneezed, and looked righteous. Leora laughed in spite of herself and let the laugh be part of the offering. They went in. The registry hall waited like a witness with a good memory and a better scowl. The testimony wall took the headlamps and turned them into an even wash. The unpunctuated LU sat exactly where it had sat yesterday, so faintly an attempt at a bar above it that a person not looking for it might have called it weather. The reed throat did not sing. It breathed. Atalia put one hand on the ledger, still wrapped, and did not touch the wall. "We're here," she said. Jasper's line. Atalia Vale's mouth. Jude Vale Ashdown's hand. Witnesses from Ora and Lant and Quince. "We have a ledger that agrees with your stone." The wall did not answer the way a human room would. A draft found Leora's thumb and made the skin along her knuckle pull tight, and she recognized the way the cave said, "I hear you." "Say the names," Leora murmured to Jude, because she had learned he needed a small clear thing to hold when the room was too big. He did. "Jasper Vale," he said. "Atalia Vale, who married him and kept a ledger. Lucian Vale, called Luke, who carved half a bar for a child and then ran from the water when it rose. Jude Vale Ashdown, who cut a bar yesterday because the room asked and because men like Kenton sell hesitation as closure." He paused. "And Mary Ashdown. Because she fed me even when she was mad." Atalia's breath made a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been a blessing. "Present, hand," the reed throat said. The words came as if a little dust had been shaken off the shutters, softer, older, intact. Jude put his palm where the shelf made a place above the groove. The stone was cold and greasy with mineral. The maul lay where they had left it yesterday, its handle holding the shape of his grip as if with remembered skin. Leora set the ledger on the counter and unwrapped it and laid it open to Lu, with the same feeling she had putting a baby on a scale. "Don't let your fingers lie." "Cut, Barward," the room said, and the way it put "or" between those two words made Leora feel a small, fierce pride for the dead who had cut their grammar so clean. "We set a bar on a token," Jude said to the cave, into the witnesses, into himself, because men sometimes needed all 3 audiences to listen at once. "We marked 2 birds for the join. I'm asking to finish what Flood and cowardice left half done. I'm asking to carry the debt." He looked at Atalia. "You are Lucian's grandson by blood and Jasper's by water," Atalia said. "You carry both whether or not your father believed you should. Finish the cut." He did not reach for the chisel. He reached for the string of old twine that had trailed from yesterday's token when it slid into the wall. It had reappeared overnight, one strand older, one new, tied with a knot she did not recognize, and that made her mouth go dry. He laid the twine across his palm, and the knot lay there like a punctuation mark that turns a sentence into law. "What is that?" he asked Atalia. "Witness knot," she said, and her voice warmed with something deeper than nostalgia. "We used to tie it when 2 houses swore to keep a fence open and a spring shared. If the knot remains when spring comes, the promise holds." If the knot rots, the houses plead forgiveness and give something good. She lifted the twine and set it on the ledger and then moved it to the stone. Tie a new one. Jude tied the knot. The muscle memory surprised him, it surprised Leora less. Men who build fence tie knots with their whole bodies even when they don't know the names of the loops. When he finished, the knot sat in his hand like a small animal choosing to live. He laid it in the groove and the groove received it like a vein receives blood. "Cut," said the room again, a little more urgent. Hale's voice slid through the outer hall like a draft with opinions. "If you damage that wall," he called, not entering but close enough to make Leora's back teeth itch, "the county will have to step in. I'll have to ask for a writ too." "Step back," Jude said without turning. "And listen. You might learn what kind of deal the dead offer when the living stop cutting corners." He lifted the chisel. Leora placed the maul in his hand. She put her palm on the ledger for ballast and felt the ghosts of all the hands who had ever held it steady. Jude set the chisel above Lu, and finished the bar in 2 careful blows. He didn't overcut. He didn't hurry. He breathed between. When the line lay complete above the name, he set the tip and made 2 small, exact ticks, the birds on the wire, above the branch. The reed throat sang one pure note like the first good sound a newborn makes when its lungs remember their work. "Recorded," the room said. "Witnessed." It breathed again, air moved, someone outside, Mina Talmary, made a sob of relief small enough to be respectful. "Say why," the room said. Jude didn't look at Atalia. He didn't look at Leora. He put his hand on the stone as if you put a hand on a horse's neck when you're asking it to forgive you for pulling too hard last winter. "Because my grandparents wanted peace," he said. "Because my father didn't know how to love a name without turning it into a weapon. Because men like Kenton are very good at counting, and this wall is better at it. Because I would rather be a steward than an owner." He took a breath. "Because water remembers." The cavity behind the shelf clicked. A new recess slid open, not where Leora would have put it, which felt right. It meant she hadn't learned the whole room in a day. For depressions like the ones yesterday waited for things that meant truth. Atalia reached into her bag and pulled out the cider again. She poured a capful into the left-hand cup and tipped it in. The liquid disappeared without a sound. She set the ledger on the edge of the recess so its shadow fell across the other 3 cups and then drew her hand back as if the book had reminded her of boundaries. "Not the ledger," Leora said, surprised by the ferocity of the sentence. "That stays with the living." "Atalia," Jude said softly. She nodded and touched the cloth once like a blessing instead of a deposit. "Then what?" she asked Leora. Leora's brain did what it did when a map wanted to lie. It made the scale bigger. She thought of the key in the glass they had given yesterday. She thought of how the cave liked pears, the way rivers liked banks. "The knot," she said, and Jude set the witness knot in the upper right. "A coin," she said, groping for a reciprocity that wasn't currency, and Atalia said, "I have one," and produced a brass token stamped with a picture of an apple and a year so old the crack in the number looked like a wrinkle in a face you loved. "The orchard's first harvest after the war," Atalia said. "The year the men took down the war signs and put up the roads." She said it in the lower left. It looked improper, and also perfect. "And the last," Leora said, and her voice went small because the truth had to go through the bottleneck of her throat to find words. "You." She looked at Jude. "Your hand." He didn't hesitate, which made her love him in the large, complicated way she had been pretending not to inventory. He laid his palm in the last cup, and the stone took a breath against his skin and took the print and let him go. The recess slid shut. The knot tugged and stayed. The coin clinked once, then went quiet. The cider's scent rose and then vanished as if a mouth had drunk it, no, as if stone had inhaled memory. "Recorded," the room said. Stewardship affirmed. The word hit harder than Leora expected. She didn't like words that men turned into lawyers' houses. This one didn't feel like a house. It felt like a bench beside a spring where a person sat on purpose. Hale chose that moment to step across the threshold because men like him had an instinct for exactly when to interrupt a vow. Stop, he said sharply, and his voice fell over the stone and lay there limp. You can't unilaterally claim stewardship without a county form, Leora said. Which we filed. Without witnesses. Which we have. Without a judge. Which we'll get. Without a cave. Which we have the honor to be standing in while it considers whether it still recognizes us. She turned to him, exhausted of patience and oddly kind. Kenton. Go home. He laughed once, breathless, not with humor. You think you can outlast me? He asked. You think tying a string and pouring a fairy drink into a crack in a rock changes the 25 signatures in my folder? He lifted the sheaf again. I will lay road. The reed throat sang, very softly. Someone outside inhaled like a person choking. Leora turned back to the wall and saw, exactly where she hoped it would not be, a thin wet line running down the right-hand frame of the registry door, not much, but steady. The hinge had started to weep. The flood had taken one more fraction of its patience. Jude, she said. He was already moving. He slid to the hinge with the rope in his hands and became the kind of man who can save a thing by listening to what it wants instead of telling it what to do. He wedged the maul between lintel and jamb and whispered to the metal through his teeth. Hold, he said. Hold a little longer. Hale stepped toward him. If that falls? It won't, Jude said, and for once Leora believed that a sentence could be in order. He looped a turn of rope around a stone horn above the hinge, set a figure 8, fed the bite behind the hinge pin, and pulled until the old iron groaned and then sighed into a seat it should have had all along. The weeping line dried to a twice-a-minute blink. Go, Leora said to Atalia, not meaning leave, meaning speak before the room chose to do it for them and without them. Say why. Atalia put her palm on the ledger and then on the wall exactly where Jude's bar had been finished. Because we are done letting men sell our pauses, she said. Because I would like to die in a valley where the road is the right size for the creek. Because the boys we bury deserve a different argument than they grew up in. Because I am Atalia Vale, and we made a covenant when I was a girl, and I have not outlived it yet. She looked at the reed throat. Let the bars we cut keep the peace we wrote. The room hummed. The drain sipped. The new recess opened and a thin ribbon of slate slid out like a tongue, bearing an inscription in a hand that was not their own. Stewardship Covenant, Ridge and River, Vale/Ashdown, recorded. Below it, smaller, witnesses, Talmery, Lant, Quince. That was both larger than the room and exactly its size. Take it, Atalia whispered. Jude lifted the ribbon with both hands. It was lighter than it looked and heavier than law. He set it in the ledger as if it were a bookmark placed by a careful ancestor for a grandchild not yet born. Hale made a sound like a man swallowing a nail. You cannot be serious, he said. A cave cannot dictate zoning. A cave can dictate water, Atalia said gently. And water dictates everything. The cave used the oldest tool it had to end the conversation. It reminded everyone who was in charge. A tremor walked up the frame of the inner door and into the ceiling ribs and tugged on the reed shutters. Dust that had been waiting a century to fall chose now. Leora sneezed and then wished she hadn't because the sound felt like sacrilege. Out, she said, instinct without argument. We're done here. Hale hesitated 1 second too long because power, when it feels like it's slipping, tends to cling. Jude didn't wait to see if he'd obey. He picked up the ledger, handed the cider to Mina, put the slate ribbon into Atalia's hands with the kind of care you usually save for newborns and guns, and gestured with his chin toward the seam they had used as an exit yesterday. They reached it as the first real gasp of water found the drains and made them speak in vowels. The seam was narrower. Jude went sideways. Leora slid after him, the ledger under her jacket. Cedar flattened himself and pushed with his back paws and squeezed like toothpaste and then shook violently as if at last releasing the day. Hale came last, grunting, dragging his dignity like a wet coat. He came through with a curse that, to his credit, he muffled when Atalia was close enough to hear it. Outside, the falls threw a little more shoulder. The deputies who had made a line politely at the mouth did not make a line politely now. They herded witnesses and would-be tourists backward with hands that made no apologies. The Ridge breathed out. Leora had one more job before she'd let herself sit on a rock and shake. County paper. The way you translate what Stone said into the language bureaucrats pretend is neutral. Judge first, she said to Jude, who looked like a man who had given blood and discovered he had twice as much as he thought. Then the sheriff. We'll ask for a restraining order with more teeth. We'll ask for a restoration bond before anyone is allowed within a mile of the hinge. We'll eat, Atalia said. She sounded like Mary. Or maybe Mary had always sounded like Atalia, and Leora had just been slow to realize these women were not separate from the Ridge, they were its grammar. Then paper. She took Jude's arm, not because she needed it, but because touch writes names where knives can't reach. They ate on the orchard's porch because Atalia was a person who understood that people talk better when sweetness sits on the table between them. The pie had cooled and found its better texture, the crust had the flake of old butter and a temper Leora admired. Cedar lay under the table and pretended he would never, ever beg. Maricela from the county office arrived with a face that meant business. She had a folder under her arm big enough to build a small boat. Behind her, the deputy DA, the sheriff's boy, and a judge with a corduroy jacket and the look of a man who had spent long years cultivating a patient expression that was actually a weapon. We can do this here, the judge said, sitting without being asked and opening a notebook sideways because he liked the lines that way. Tell me what you did today. Leave out the poetry unless it's relevant. Atalia told him. Jude told him. Leora told him the parts the ledger didn't, and when he raised an eyebrow at her mention of the reed throat singing, she said, You can call it a pressure whistle if you need to, Your Honor. It says the same thing in any language, names matter. Hale arrived at the gate, saw the judge, and rearranged his face into something he thought would look like respect. You set a charge, the judge said to him without preamble. Don't lie to me. I prefer to save that sport for men who think I can't tell. Hale glanced at his shoes. A small one, he said. For convenience, the judge finished. For speed. For profit. For parlor tricks. He made a note. You will pay for a full engineering assessment of that hinge and for any work the county geologist deems necessary to stabilize it. And you will keep your people out of that canyon until I say you may walk there. If you step off the road between now and that day, the fine will fund a new library. He looked at Jude. You cut a name? I finished one, Jude said. The judge's mouth twitched. Better, he said. Ms. Vale, are you asking the court to recognize a private covenant? I'm asking the court to recognize that the people who keep this valley alive have always done so by writing smaller than you prefer, Atalia said. And that the smallness keeps us honest. The judge looked at the ledger. He looked at the slate ribbon. He breathed out through his nose and became, very briefly, younger by 30 years. My grandmother was a quince, he said, not waiting for their surprise. She put me on her kitchen counter when she made pie and told me where the fence used to run. I was too stupid to write it down. I will not be too stupid today. He signed 3 things. He handed 2 to Maricela. Register the cave as a historic site under emergency order. File a temporary stewardship recognition and set a hearing for the next calendar. And call the paper. If anyone's going to get this wrong in print, I prefer to pick which errors. Hale started to speak. The judge raised one finger without looking at him, and the words died. Leora loved that finger more than she loved pie. Mr. Hale, the judge said at last, mild as cider. Do you know what stewardship means? Hale smiled his best smile, which had found buyers in worse markets. I do, Your Honor. Good, the judge said. Because that is now the name under which you will be permitted to act in this valley. If you want to build anything, you'll file it under a conservation easement. You'll call it an interpretive road. You'll fund a school program. You'll let Ms. Ansell write the signs. And you will ask the people whose names are on that wall whether the thing you propose will serve the spring. He closed his notebook. If I see a bulldozer touch a root, I will remember what my grandmother said about men who break what they cannot grow. Hale's face did not know which color to choose. He chose white. Go home, the judge added, exactly as Atalia had said earlier. Think about whether you want to be the man whose name the cave spits when it says don't. Hale went because language had finally found a lever that worked on him. He left the gate open. Cedar trotted down and closed it with his nose, which was not how gates worked but which everyone agreed was how it had just worked. Tomorrow, the judge said, standing, we will all feel different about this. Which is why I am going to sign this now. He put his name where it would hurt least later. Miss Vale, bring your ledger again then. Mr. Ashdown, bring your dog. He looked at Leora. Bring your words. People like me need them. They watched the county cars leave, the orchard breathe, the ridge pretend it had always been calm. Atalia went inside to wash mugs without letting anyone help because letting people help is how you apologize for power, and she had never apologized for power that had been earned properly. Jude set his hand on the slate ribbon in the ledger and then lifted it and held it up so the light could find it. His thumb traced the word stewardship until the stone went warm under his skin. You changed your name, Leora said before she could talk herself out of the sentence. Not to Ashdown. Not to Vale. To Steward. He looked at her, startled, as if she had just read one of his private notes without asking and found love written where he was sure he'd left sarcasm. Say it again, he said. You changed your name to Steward, she repeated softly. That's the only name that can hold the others without making them fight. He swallowed and did not pretend he wasn't. I can live with that, he said. He lifted the slate to shoulder height. Jude Vale Ashdown, Steward, he said to the yard as if the trees were court and the wind was the recorder. If the cave asks again, that's what I'll say. The wind lifted, the leaves answered with a small applause that didn't embarrass anyone. Come, Atalia said from the doorway. Help me put this book on its shelf. And then bring it down again tomorrow. And the next day. Until men like Hale get bored and go dig holes somewhere that doesn't remember its own name. She smiled. It didn't make her look younger. It made her look exactly like herself. They did. They put the ledger away and carried nothing but air out to the truck, and then somehow the air felt like more than they'd ever carried before. Night found them back at the ranch. Mary had left a pot on low the way a woman does who knows the world never ends and also never takes a break. They ate. They washed bowls. They didn't say the words they were thinking because sometimes you give a day and night to rest in before you start folding it neatly into narrative. When the dishes were done, Jude stepped out onto the porch. Leora followed. Cedar beat them there and assumed his position as third post, the one that doesn't carry anything but makes the other two honest. I don't know how to do tomorrow, Jude said. You will, Leora said. You'll wake up and put on the same jacket and it will feel heavier and lighter and you will be both. You'll drive to town and Maricela will hand you a paper and you'll sign it and your hand will shake and you'll think, I'm not enough, and you will be wrong. You always know what to say when my mouth goes stupid, he said. I have a ledger for that, she said. He looked at her, not at her mouth, exactly as she'd wanted him to for weeks without letting herself label it as wanting. Stay, he said. She could have asked what he meant. She didn't. Yes, she said. I will. He nodded once, the way he had in the cave before he turned the token, and the same kind of relief moved through her. They slept. The ridge watched like ridges do, impassive, ancient, amused. Morning came burned clean. They went back to town. The county room smelled like coffee and impatience. Maricela pushed papers. The judge stamped. The deputy DA sent an email that would turn into a lawsuit if anyone dared breathe wrong in the canyon. By afternoon the porch at Atalia's was a court of a different sort. Men and women who had once tried to dissolve each other in low-grade grievances came and stood within hearing distance and pretended they needed to check the corners of the apple shed. The ledger lay open on the table beside the slate ribbon, which had been wrapped in unbleached cloth as if modesty could protect stone from gawking. A black SUV rolled up to the gate and stopped. Hale didn't get out. The passenger did, Milo. Yesterday's boy. He walked slow and careful, like a man choosing a road. He held a box. For the museum, he said to Leora, not looking at Hale, who stared straight ahead at a future he no longer controlled. It's my granddad's notes from when he worked the survey for the bench road in '92. There's a sketch here of where we cut into the spring without meaning to. I think the judge will like it. He swallowed. I quit. He set the box down. And I told my mother I did. Leora took the box. She did not cry. She would do that later under a tree where the leaves could make gossip out of it. Thank you, Milo. Hale looked at the boy as if betrayal were a word that might yet obey him. It did not. He backed away and the SUV rolled forward and then away and then out of the valley. The day settled into a long exhale that felt like the kind of afternoon when a person repairs a fence because they want their hands to know something will still stand when they're done. Jude and Leora returned to the falls at dusk with Italia because some rituals are better done twice when the first time felt like a test. They stepped to the mouth, poured cider for the dead and the living, and spoke the names without fear that they would forget any. The reed throat did not sing. It didn't need to. Cedar sat with the patience of saints and dogs and the very old. Leora put her palm on the door and felt through stone a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. She did not try to measure it. Some maps are meant to be lived in, not drawn. Ready? Jude asked, not meaning to leave, meaning to move forward. Yes, she said. They turned away together. On the trail, she reached for his hand because some scenes deserve to end like that, not with a gunshot or a gasp, but with the soft click of two names finding the same page. He squeezed once, like a vow. The ridge exhaled again, as if it had been holding its breath through 3 generations and had finally found the sentence it had been trying to say. At the truck, her phone buzzed, a message from the channel she helped Mara run for the museum to keep the valley younger than its oldest wrong. She glanced down. 100 comments. 1,000. A picture of a hinge lit by headlamps. A sentence from Maricela, pinned to the top like a new nail in an old beam, stewardship recorded. Names marked. The ridge keeps its own. Leora smiled down at the screen, up at the ridge, sideways at the man who had changed his name to the only one the cave would honor forever. She didn't need to say anything. The water said the rest. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.